Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, 37b of Maseches Kiddushin, and we are, or I believe is 11 lines down on the page. The end of the line it says Amar Abaye. The Gemara is discussing, or is going to discuss now, the opinion that we learned last week of Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, or actually, in that brisa that we referred to, it was just quoted as Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. It was the words of Rabbi Yishmael, and there Rabbi Yishmael said that anytime the Torah uses the words Mosh Vosechem, your dwelling place, along with the expression of Kisavo el haaretz, when you come to the land, whenever you have coming to the land, bi al haaretz, coming to the land, in conjunction with the word dwelling place, Moshav, Mosh Vosechem, your dwelling place, your dwelling places, so then, whenever you have that combo, so then you can know that what it means by dwelling places, doesn't mean anywhere in the world. It means just after you dwell, after you settle the land, that's when this halacha, whatever it might be, would be applicable. So whenever you have in order for it to say that this is only applicable after you settle the land, you have to have that combination. It has to say when you come to the land and then when you and dwelling places, meaning after you conquer and settle the land, then this halacha is applicable. So the Gemara says, Amar Abaye says, Hai Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, Mapik Me'idach Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. This tradition from Rabbi Yishmael, this teaching in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, here they refer to it as a Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. They taught in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael, but it really means this version of Rabbi Yishmael's opinion is mapik, goes out, it's different than a different tradition from Rabbi Yishmael. Did Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, because we have the following teaching from the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael that says, Ho'il v'nemru bios b'Torah stam, since it says at times, bia, coming to the land, stam, without further elaboration, meaning without mentioning dwelling places, but just that expression itself, anytime it says v'hayaki savo al haaretz, it will be when you come to the land, or something like that. Uparat l'cha kasa be'echad mehen la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva. And in another place, in a specific place where it does say when you come to the land, it also specifically says when you inherit and conquer the land. And that was in the context of a king. By a king it says, Kisavo al haaretz, when you come to the land, virishta v'yashavta ba, and you inherit it, and you settle in it. And you say, let me place upon myself a king. So since there is one place where we have this combination of coming to the land, and not just a mention of settling it, but specifically a mention of this will apply after you inherit and settle the land. There it's explicit. Virishta v'yashavta ba. You inherit it and you settle it. Then you should appoint a king. So what we learn from there is Af kol la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva. So we learn from there and we expand it and we say anytime it says a mitzvah applies when you come to the land, it only means after you settle the land, conquer and settle the land. So this Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael is saying whenever it says when you come to the land, it means when you come to the land, conquer it and settle it, then this mitzvah applies. How do I know? I learn it from the one specific case where it says it by a king. It says when you come to the land and conquer it and inherit it, settle it, then you should make yourself a king. Place a king upon yourselves. So we learn from there that anytime it says when you come to the land, it means after you inherit and settle it. Now that's different than the previous version of Rabbi Yishmael that we started with, which we learned last week. Because the other version of Rabbi Yishmael requires that it not just say when you come to the land, but also it has to say Moshav. It has to say that you settle it. Then, if I have those two things, if it says when you come to the land, and it talks about Moshe Vosechem, your dwelling places, your settlements, so then I know that it means after you've conquered and settled the land. But if it would just say when you come to the land without saying anything about a Moshe, without settling and dwelling, then it would apply as soon as you come to the land, even without conquering the land. So these two versions of Rabbi Yishmael are slightly different. The original version that we had is only where it says coming and settling. Then we know it applies only after you've settled the land. This version says whenever it says coming to the land, even if it doesn't say anything about conquering and settling, or even Moshe Vosechem, just settlements, dwelling places, still it only applies after the land has been settled. Says the Gemara, V'idach. So the other one, meaning the Rabbi Yishmael that we started with, the Rabbi Yishmael from last week, who says it has to say Moshav, why doesn't he learn from the situation of a melech, of a king, and apply it to everywhere else? Like this new version of Rabbi Yishmael, we'll call it Rabbi Yishmael number 2. Why does Rabbi Yishmael number 1 not say like Rabbi Yishmael number 2, who learns from where it says by a king, when you come to the land and settle it, and inherit it and settle it, then the mitzvah applies? And why don't we learn from there to everywhere where it says when you come to the land? Mishum, the reason is because there's actually another case where it also mentions explicitly when you come to the land, inherit it and settle it. And that is in the situation of Bikurim, the requirement to bring your first fruits to the Kohen. So there it says it will be when you come to the land. It also mentions inheriting and settling. So therefore, it's a rule that we spent quite a bit of time about not too long ago. It's shnei kesuvim habayim ka'echad. It's two psukim coming together to teach me the same thing. And the rule is, if you have two psukim coming together, we don't learn from there and apply it to other scenarios. If there's only one place where it teaches me, so I say this was the example, and I apply it to everywhere else. But once you have two, why do I need a second one? Once I had one, I knew to apply it to that second one. I knew to apply it to everywhere. If there's a second one, I must be saying it stops here. Don't apply it beyond here. That's the rule of Shnei Kesuvim Abayim Ka'echad Ein Melamdim. We have two psukim teaching me the same thing, the same general idea. We don't extend it to other scenarios. So therefore, the Torah of Rabbi Yishmael number 1 says, we don't want to learn from Melech and apply the rule to everywhere and say wherever it says Bia, wherever it mentions coming to the land, it means only after you inherit and settle it does the law apply. Because we can also not only learn that from a king, but we can learn it from Bikurim. And then it's two psukim teaching me the same thing. We don't extend it to other scenarios. V'idach. And the other one, why does he respond? The one who says, no, we do learn it from here. Tanya Rabbi Yishmael number 2. He'll tell you tzrichi. They say, no, it needed to say both. When does that rule apply that you can't, that once it says it twice, it teaches it twice, you can't extend it out? When does that apply? That's when it wasn't necessary to say both. But if it was necessary to say both, then we could still learn out from there to other places. So he explains it was necessary to say both. Meaning, if it had just taught it by a king, I would not have known to apply it in the scenario of Bikurim, of the first fruits. If it had just taught it by Bikurim, by first fruits, I wouldn't have known to apply it to the scenario of a king. If the Torah only said it by a king, when you come to the land and settle it and inherit it and settle it, then the mitzvah of making a king applies. V'lo kasa bikurim, but it didn't say it by bikurim. It just said when you come to the land, but it didn't say and conquer it and settle it. Havamina, I would have said bikurim dekamisani la'alter. I would have said bikurim, the first fruits, which is the fruits that you benefit from immediately when you come to the land. So I would have said that mitzvah applies right away, not only after conquering it. That's what I would have thought. I wouldn't have learned it from a king. I would say a king you don't have to appoint until you settle the land. But Bikurim, maybe you're benefiting right away from your fruit trees. You should have to bring Bikurim. You should have to donate your first fruits already in the first year. So that's why it had to say it by Bikurim. That it only applies after you've settled the land. V'ikasa Bikurim, and if it had taught it by Bikurim and said, let's learn from Bikurim to everywhere else, V'lo kasa Melech, and it hadn't said it by a king, Hava Amina, right, and I'd be expected to learn to apply it to a king from Bikurim. Hava Amina, I would have said, Melech dedarko lichbosh le'alter. I would have said that for a king what he does is he conquers. That's one of the things a king does. So I would have said, it doesn't make sense to say to wait till after you conquer the land to appoint a king. You should appoint a king right away. So if it hadn't said it specifically by a king that you don't have to appoint a king until you conquer the land, I would have assumed that you have to appoint a king right away and not learned it from Bikurim. So that's why it had to say it both by Bikurim and by Melech, that they only apply once you've already conquered and settled the land. And I can still learn to other places from there because these were both necessary to teach. V'idach, and the other one responds back to Tanya Rabbi Yishmael, number 1, who says, no, you can't learn from there. He says, Nichtov Rechban HaMelech. He says, no, it would have been enough just to rag it by a king. V'lo bayi Bikurim, and you wouldn't have needed to say it about Bikurim, and I could have learned it, Bikurim from Melech, V'ana Amina, and I would have said, Uma Melech de Lichbosh, if a king whose whole purpose is to conquer, after Yerusha Yeshiva, yet still the requirement only kicks in after we've inherited and settled the land. Bikurim lo kol shekain. Wouldn't I say all the more so that Bikurim shouldn't kick in until then? Very nice that you benefit from it right away, but logically it would make so much sense for the mitzvah of the king to apply right away, and yet it doesn't. So, all the more so Bikurim shouldn't apply right away. So why does it say Bikurim? Why does it have to say it by Bikurim? I could have figured it out. Oh, because it wants to tell you to stop here. Don't learn beyond here. It's 2 psukim teaching me the same thing. And it's limiting it to just these 2. V'idach. And the other one responds, he says, very nice logic, but ikasav hachi, had it said only the king, and it hadn't said it by Bikurim, and I was expected to figure it out by Bikurim from the fact that the mitzvah of the king only kicks in after you conquer the land and settle it. So all the more so Bikurim. So Havamina, I would have said that no, Bikurim is different. Mididahava achala. Just like the mitzvah of challah. The mitzvah that when we have dough, we have to separate out a piece to give to the Kohen. Right nowadays, we can't give it to the Kohen because the Kohanim aren't pure, so they can't consume it. So when we separate challah, we just destroy it and then dispose of it. But that's the mitzvah of challah. And that it very explicitly applies already at the moment that they enter the land. Bivoachem, it says, like when you're coming, in the sort of the present tense. So we know that applies already when they enter the land. So I always said, just like challah, which is like a type of tithe and donation to the Kohen, just like that applies right when you enter the land. So I would have said that Bikurim also applies right when you enter the land. Kamash Malan, that's why it had to say Bikurim explicitly. That it does not apply right when you enter the land. It only applies after you settle the land. And indeed, says the second Rabbi Yishmael, it is necessary to say Bikurim explicitly. I wouldn't have figured it out from a king. Both are necessary. It has to teach me it in the context of a king. That it only applies, the mitzvah only applies after you've inherited and settled the land. And in the context of Bikurim. And it's not redundant and double and therefore Ein Melamdin, we can't learn from there. No, they're both necessary and we could still learn from here to other scenarios. And therefore the second Rabbi Yishmael sets out this rule that wherever it says Bia, coming to the land, even if it doesn't say anything about settling it, it only applies after you have inherited and settled the land. The Gemara continues, it says, Behashta da'amar tchovas aguf noheges bein be'eretz Yisrael bein b'chutz la'aretz. So now that we've said, as we learned last week, the week before, that any obligation, right, we learned it in the Mishnah really, any obligation that's on an individual and not on the land is applicable both in Israel and outside of Israel. If it's an obligation on the land, so except for a couple of exceptions, it only applies in Israel. But if it's an obligation on the person, it applies both in Israel and outside of Israel. So if that's a rule, so then the Gemara is going to ask about a few different mitzvos where we find the word moshav, your dwelling place, moshvosechem, your dwelling places. Now when it says moshvosechem, the implication is wherever you might live. But why would I need that word in the context of any mitzvah that's on the person? Any mitzvah, we have a rule. Any mitzvah that's on the person applies anywhere. In Israel, outside Israel. So, in any scenario that's a mitzvah on the person, it shouldn't be necessary to say in all your dwelling places. So the Gemara is going to go through a few cases where it's going to ask, why does it need to say that? So now that I know that obligations on the individual apply both in Israel and outside of Israel, Moshav dekasav rachmana gabe Shabbos lamali. Why does the Torah have to say the word Moshav in the context of Shabbos? B'chol moshvosechem. In all your dwelling places. I know that. It's an obligation on the person. So I know it applies in all your dwelling places, wherever you might live. So the Gemara says, it was necessary still to say that. Kasav gadaita chamina, I might have thought to say, Hoel uve'inyana dimo ados ksiva, that since Shabbos is mentioned in the context of the holidays, in Parshas Emor, which, and probably other places as well, but in Parshas Emor, which is this coming week's Parsha when I'm recording this, and last week's Parsha, most likely when you see this, so, or hear this. So, since in Parshas Emor it mentions Shabbos in the context of all the other holidays, I might have thought, Tibaya Kiddush Kimoados. I might have thought that Shabbos also requires sanctification by the Beis Din. So when it comes to Yom Tov, when it comes to regular holidays, so we have an idea of Kiddush HaChodesh. The Beis Din, the High Court, consecrates when Rosh Chodesh is, when the month begins, and thereby they really are consecrating when the holidays are going to fall out. Because the holidays are dates of the month, they follow, Rosh Chodesh. So whenever Rosh Chodesh is, so Pesach is 15 days later. So the Beis Din is really consecrating when the holidays fall out. So I might have thought that I would have thought that Shabbos also needs sanctification, and that would, and where does that occur? It has to occur in by the High Court, which is in Yerushalayim. So I might have thought that it only kicks in once the High Court sanctifies it. That's why it says B'chol Moshe V'Sechem. No, anywhere you dwell, wherever you dwell, it's not affected by the High Court. There's no need to sanctify it, to consecrate it, for the High Court to consecrate Shabbos. Shabbos is Kodesh on its own. It's holy on its own without the involvement of man. B'chol Moshe V'Sechem, wherever you are, it's automatically consecrated. Then it asks, Moshe D'Kas Rachmana Gabe Chayla V'Dam. It also says the word Moshe by the prohibition to consume chaylev, which are certain forbidden fats of an animal, and dam, and the blood of an animal. Lamali. Why does it have to say Moshe? That it applies everywhere. That's a commandment on meat, not to consume those things. So on the individual. So why does it need to say everywhere? I know it's everywhere. So we say it's no, was still necessary. Sal Gadaita Chamina. I might have thought to say. Since the prohibition of consuming these forbidden fats and blood is mentioned in the context of karbanos, of offerings, I might have said, Bisman de'ika karban nitzar chayla v'dam. When there are karbanos being brought, when there's a temple and there are offerings being brought, so then nitzer chelav adam. Then these fats and blood are forbidden. But bisman deleka carbon lo. But I might say if there are no carbonos being brought, then these laws don't apply. Since they're mentioned in the context of carbonos, I might have said they only apply when carbonos are applicable. Kamash malan. That's why the Torah says the word moshav, b'chol moshvosechem, in all your dwelling places, to tell us that it applies all your dwelling places at all times, and not only when there are carbonos being brought. Now, we ask, Moshav dekasav rachmana gabe matzah. We're going to leave out the word maror. It might be thrown in there, but it's really not the point here. It doesn't say Moshav by maror, it says by matzah. Moshav, that it says in the context of the mitzvah to eat matzah, lamali. Why does he have to say it by matzah? It says, B'chol moshvosechem tochul matzah. So in all your dwelling places you should eat matzah. Matzah is an obligation on the individual. I know it applies wherever we are in the world. So why does he have to say, where in all your dwelling places? Says the Gemara, it's trich, I needed to say it. Sagadaita chamina, I might have thought to say, ho eluksiv. Since the Torah says, al matzos umerorim yochuhu, with regards to the Karban Pesach, the Pesach offering, it says you should eat it with matzah and maror. So I might have said, Bizman de'ika Pesach in. I would have said the mitzvah matzah applies when there's a Karban Pesach. Bizman de'leka Pesach lo, but if there's no Karban Pesach, the mitzvah matzah does not apply. Kamash malan, that's what it has to tell me, B'chol moshvosechem, in all your dwelling places at all times, even when there's no Karban Pesach. And that's why even nowadays the matzah is still a mitzvah d'oraisa. It's a Torah obligation, even though we don't have a Karban Pesach. Because it says, B'chol moshvosechem, in all your dwelling places, even when we don't have a Karban Pesach. As opposed to maror, it doesn't say it by maror. Maror is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It's a rabbinic obligation. But the biblical obligation is specifically with a Karban Pesach. Bia dekasav rachmana gabe tefillin, upeter chamar lamali. Now the Gemara asks, why does it say, if it's true that all mitzvahs that are on the individual apply both in Israel and outside of Israel, so why does it say by the mitzvah of tefillin, it will be when you come to the land? Even when we're not in the land, the mitzvah applies. And the same thing with the mitzvah to redeem a firstborn donkey. Also, it says when you come to the land, but that's not a mitzvah on the land, and it applies even outside of Israel. So why does it say when you come to the land? Says the Gemara, we need that for the teaching of Rabbi Yishmael, who said, Asay mitzvah zu shebishvilo tikanes la'aretz. Rabbi Yishmael explained that when the Torah says says when you come to the land, this is back in Parashas Bo, so over there they're still in Mitzrayim. What Hashem is telling them is, I'm going to give you the mitzvah of tefillin, I'm going to give you the mitzvah of redeeming the firstborn donkey, and I'm telling you that you should do this when you come to the land, but he's also telling them to do it now, but he's saying when you come to the land, you'll do it. In other words, it says Tanya to Rabbi Yishmael, this mitzvah it's in the merit of this mitzvah that you'll get to enter the land. Do this mitzvah in order that you will be able to enter the land. That's why it says in that context, when you enter the land, you'll do it. Because already now, I'm telling you to do it. I guess you'll do it when you enter the land as a continuation of what you're doing now. It's in the merit of doing it now that you'll be able to enter the land. Okay, the Gemara continues. 4 lines from the bottom, it says, Bishlam olaman amar moshav kol makam shatam yoshvim mashma. It says, I understand, according to the opinion, that moshav means wherever you dwell, anywhere in the world, So then, hainu dichsiv, then I understand the pasuk in Sefer Yoshua, where it says, Vayochu me'avor ha'aretz v'machras ha'pesach. It says that they ate after they entered the land, the day after Pesach. Which implies, Mimachras HaPesach Achol, which implies that they ate after the first day of Pesach, Meikar Achol, but before that they didn't eat. In other words, we have an idea. We have the Torah discusses. We've been discussing it, right? That you can't eat chadash. You can't eat from the new crop until the second day of Pesach when you bring the Karban Omer. So this pasuk is saying that after they entered the land of Israel, they ate after the first day of Pesach, meaning on the second day of Pesach, when they could bring the Karban Omer. Then they ate, implying that before that they didn't eat from the crops of the land. So the year that they entered Israel, it sounds like they kept the laws of Chadash. It was only a few days. They entered, I think, on the 10th of Nisan. And then this is 5-6 days later. But during those few days, they didn't eat from the crops of the land. They waited until they brought the Karban Omer, or at least until the day they would bring the Karban Omer. So, but up to then they didn't eat. So, the Gemara says, Alma akruv Omer v'hadar achol. You see at the top of the next page that they brought the Karban Omer, it says, and then they ate. Which means they were keeping the laws of Chadash. They wouldn't eat Chadash. Now, we'll see what the problem is. Meaning, if Moshe means you have to keep it anywhere, so then it's fine. They're somewhere. They'll keep the laws of Chadash. But if you say that Moshe teaches you that it only applies after they conquer the land and settle it, neichol la'alter. They should have eaten it right away. Why were they waiting? Why did they wait until after the first day of Pesach to eat from the crops of the land? So the Gemara is questioning, we had a machlokas last week, we had a dispute, that when it says Moshav, your dwelling place, does it mean wherever you live in the world? B'chol moshavosechem, wherever you are, and therefore Chadash applies anywhere in the world? Or does Moshav mean not anywhere in the world, it's only in Israel? It's an agricultural mitzvah that only applies in Israel. So what does it mean, moshavosechem, in your dwelling places? It means after you've settled the land. So, but if it would mean after you settle the land, then it shouldn't apply when they first entered the land of Israel. So why does it say that they only ate after the first day of Pesach from the land? It sounds like they were keeping the laws of Chadash. If b'chol moshavosechem, or it doesn't say exactly that way, I think it says El Eretz Moshavosechem. It says the land of your dwelling place. But if the word Moshavosechem means anywhere in the world, and the laws of Chadash apply as soon as they enter the land, so I understand why they didn't eat until the day after Pesach, of the first day of Pesach, until the second day, when they brought the Karban Omer. But if it means that this only kicks in after you've conquered and settled the land, well, that's not going to be for another 14 years. So why are they keeping Chadash their first week in the land of Israel? So the Gemara says, the answer is, Lo havu tzrichi. It's not that they were waiting because they were waiting for the Karban Omer. That's not why they waited until the second day of Pesach to eat. It was because they didn't need it. They didn't need to eat from the land yet because they still had man. Tichsiv Ubnei Yisrael achu es haman 40 shana ad ba'am el eretz no Shabbos. The pasuk says that the Jewish people, it's a pasuk in Parshas Beshalach. It says the Jewish Bnei Yisrael ate the man for 40 years until they came to the land of settlement. Es haman achu, the man they ate ad ba'am el k'tzei Eretz Canaan, until they got to the edge of Eretz Canaan. So it's a strange pasuk. First of all, it says they ate the man for 40 years. And it says they ate it until they came to Eretz no Shabbos, the land of their dwelling place. It sounds like they ate it even in the land of Israel. But then it says they ate it until they got to the land, at the edge of the land. So the Gemara says, which one is it? When they got to their dwelling place, meaning in the land, or only at the edge of Eretz Canaan? It can't say, you can't say that they ate until they got into the land, because it says until they got to the edge of the land. You can't say they only ate until they got to the edge of the land, Because it says they ate until they got to their dwelling place. Haketza, how do we resolve this? The answer is as follows. B'shiva ba'adar meis Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu died on the 7th of Adar, Zayin Adar. Upasak man mileir, and when Moshe died, the man stopped falling. Vayimustapkim miman shebekleim ad shisha asar b'Nisan. But from the 7th of Adar until the 16th of Nisan, they had enough man that was left over that they were able to live off of until that day. And on that day, they then had to start to eat from the land. So the answer says, so the resolution to the contradiction in the verse is, did they eat man until they got to the edge of the land, or did they eat man until they got to the land of their settlement? The answer is both, in a way. They had man falling until they got to the edge of the land, and then Moshe died, but they continued to be able to eat the leftovers until they got to the land of their settlement, even after they crossed the Jordan, the Yarden. And that is how this Tana of Rabbi Yishmael, I think it's Rabbi Eliezer, this is how this opinion will resolve the pasuk. Even though it's true, he says, that the mitzvah of Chadash only kicks in after they conquer and settle the land, after 14 years. So why does it say that they only ate from the land the day after the first day of Pesach? Why? It sounds like we're waiting for the Karban Omer. It sounds like they're keeping the laws of Chadash. The answer is no, it has nothing to do with Chadash. It just happens to be that that's when they ran out of food. They ran out of man. And that's when they ran out of man, so that's when they started to eat from the land itself.